My name is Ben Moise. They called me Benny Moise when I first walked into Cobalt High School here 48 years ago. The last graduates came out of this school in 1976. Some of its classrooms were used by nearby Haileybury High, and then for adult education through the 1980s. But as near as I can tell, the school has been abandoned for about 30 years. And it's still intact. A few weeks ago, my brother Tony and I came back to Cobalt for a high school reunion. I came back again this weekend to shoot video inside the abandoned school, mainly so I could share it with my fellow graduates. But I also want to document something rare and authentic that is slowly disappearing. Something that might speak to people beyond Cobalt. In a few minutes, we'll go inside, see if we can stir up some ghosts. But first, I want to talk to people who didn't go to this school. I want to show you where we are. To taste the full sweetness of this abandoned high school, you need to know the incredible story of the town that built it. This is the town of Cobalt, National Historic Site, named Ontario's most historic town. This is the place A.Y. Jackson from the Group of Seven called the Klondike of the East. But it wasn't gold that brought thousands of people here from all over the world in 1904. It was silver. Veins of soft, high-grade silver up to half a meter wide and 100 meters long, right there on the ground in front of you. 2 years earlier, Liberal Premier George Ross had made one of the best government decisions in Canadian history when he decided to use taxpayer money to build a public railroad northward into New Ontario. The investment was returned in spades almost immediately. In the fall of 1903, woodcutters on the railroad crew found silver nuggets and veins in the exposed bedrock along the shores of what would later be named Cobalt Lake. Overnight, Cobalt became one of the largest silver-producing areas in the world and a generator of massive wealth, more than the Klondike. That wealth was the driving force in the Ontario economy through the early 1900s. Cobalt was the Klondike goldfields in Dawson City rolled up into one, because here the mines and the town were in the same place, not 20 kilometers apart. The silver was all around and underneath the homes and businesses. For 24 hours a day inside the town, dynamite exploded through rock, aerial tramways carried ore buckets above the streets, and stamp mills pounded the ore into bits. The mining companies tunneled under the buildings, dug trenches down the middle of the streets, sank shafts on street corners, piled waste rock beside homes, and filled the town's lakes with tailings. Cobalt was essentially a colony of Toronto 9 hours away at the other end of the rail line. The wealth and business it generated played a key role in building the Toronto Stock Exchange and the Canadian banking system we have today. In other words, Bay Street. Cobalt money also lifted Toronto above Montreal as the financial capital of Canada. And it built the Casa Loma, along with many of the old mansions in Rosedale. Cobalt had people around the world dreaming of discovering fabulous wealth in New Ontario. In 1906, for 3 days in a row, mounted police rode in to break up crowds of New Yorkers fighting to buy cobalt mining stocks from curbside brokers. Thomas Edison visited Cobalt and became a mine owner. Laurier, Borden, and Mackenzie King all came to visit. So did the Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VIII. In 1905, all 98 members of the newly elected Ontario legislature toured Cobalt together with the new Conservative Premier James Whitney. Why? Because Cobalt was a fat silver goose for the province. But it was also a new phenomenon. A boomtown with economic and social development running on steroids far ahead of government services, it drove the Ontario government to come up with new labor laws, including the 8-hour workday, new health and sanitation laws, new taxation laws, and a new police force based in Cobalt, the OPP. In many ways, Cobalt was a laboratory and incubator for the rest of the province. Ontario really didn't have a large mining industry before Cobalt exploded the myth that there were no important precious metals east of the Rockies. Inspired by the confidence gained here, backed by money made here, and using the skills learned here, prospectors and geologists quickly fanned out across New Ontario and found large deposits of gold and other metals, giving Ontario and Canada a huge new industry. Historic cobalt had a remarkable impact on Canadian sports and arts. In 1909, cobalt mine owner M.J. O'Brien and his son Ambrose created the National Hockey Association, the direct forerunner of today's NHL. The O'Briens owned all or part of 4 of the initial 5 teams in the league, including the Cobalt Silver Kings, who competed for the Stanley Cup in 1910. To round out their new league, the O'Briens also created a new team of French-Canadian players, the legendary Montreal Canadiens, who played their first game in franchise history against Cobalt. In 1913, Cobalt also had a women's hockey team playing against Haileybury for the O'Brien Cup. In the late 1920s, A.Y. Jackson and Franklin Carmichael from the Group of 7 showed up to paint Cobalt's unique architecture and mining structures. They were followed by Isabel McLaughlin, and Yvonne McCaig Hauser, both from the Canadian Group of Painters. More than 11,000 people were living in Cobalt in 1911. Perhaps 1,100 live here now, about 5 hours north of Toronto. Many of them are descendants of the original miners who lived right beside the head frames sitting on top of the mine shafts. Today, the rock beneath this town is honeycombed with kilometers of tunnels and hundreds of shafts, open holes, and underground caverns. It's like Swiss cheese with holes where the silver was. Above ground, Cobalt has been left with a legacy of many old buildings and mining structures, some of them abandoned. Our old high school, up there at the top of the hill, is one of them. Let's go inside. This is the window to the boys' washroom. There's a piece of plywood off here, and there's a ladder inside. So this is where we're going to go in. There's a door in the boys' washroom. In 1971, I started a petition to get a door put on the boys' washroom, just like the one in the girls' washroom. I got about 30 signatures on a piece of paper. I gave it to Mrs. Riley, asked her to give it to Principal Bishop. Mrs. Riley, Kay Riley, was our beloved school secretary. She said, "Don't be silly, Benny. If I give this to Mr. Bishop, you'll just be in trouble again." I saw myself as a gender activist, fighting for social justice. She saw me as an idiot trying to cause trouble. She was usually right. Now let's see if we can find the girls' washroom. There we are. Secrets of the girls' washroom, about to be revealed. No urinals. But look at this. A full-length mirror. How come we didn't have one of those in the boys' washroom? No wonder girls are better looking than boys. They have mirrors. library is off to my right here. It doesn't have any windows and I don't have a flashlight, so we're not going in there. I think that's where the boogeyman is anyway. That's the annex. We're not going in there either. Wow. This was a small high school. 7 classrooms, a library, and an auditorium. No gym. When I was here, there was about 120 students, grade 9 through 13. Some of my grade 13 classes had 3 students. I think this is Mr. Hetram's classroom. He once hit me on the head with a book, about 6 times. I don't remember the title, but I remember the lesson, which was, I don't like the nickname you kids gave me. Dude was all right. He just had a hard time with yahoos like Steve Morin, Tommy Bazinet, Aaron Koza, Bernie Johnson. Those buggers were a bad influence on me and the other good kids. Believe it or not, they were still teaching us Latin in the early 1970s. There we were, standing on the threshold of the digital age, and they were teaching us a language that had been dead for 2,000 years. But I'll tell you, the boys among us who took typing class, which was dominated by girls at the time, we were prepared when keyboards came along and quickly became computer literate, unlike some of our peers. This is the auditorium. The entire student body, 120 students, would fit in this one room during school assemblies. That's how small and intimate this school was. In 1973, Student Council President Frank Parcher was speaking up on that stage when someone threw 2 eggs and hit the wall behind him. Nothing against Frank. We all liked Frank. Today, I understand the culprit was probably seeking negative attention. I think it was Keith Riley. Pretty sure it was. This was the lab, Mr. Landrigan's classroom. This is where we used to dissect frogs and fetal pigs, actually. I don't think they do that in high school anymore. Just to give you an idea of property values in this part of town. That big white house across the road there belongs to Danny McGarry. A few weeks ago he was telling me he's putting it on the market, expects to get about $60,000 for it. Smaller houses in the neighborhood have gone for about $40,000. This is where Mr. Landrigan and Bobby Leo fought their WWF title match. In the doorway here. I declared Bobby the winner. Mr. Landrigan was bigger, but Bobby was more determined. He didn't walk into that classroom 1 second before he was ready. Bobby was our hero. This is the teacher's room. I told a couple of stories of student-teacher conflicts, but that wasn't common. We generally had good teachers here. Dude was all right. We all liked Zeke O'Brien. And we had some great teachers. Mr. Reynolds and Mr. Marmarek were decent, intelligent, learned men. Mr. Marmarek came from MIT to this little high school and had us reading Marshall McLuhan and Vance Packard in a brand new grade 12 media course. Those of us who read Marshall McLuhan in 1973, we were given a lens through which we could view and at least partly understand the global village that emerged in our lifetimes. That's a frickin' education, man. This is the guidance counselor's room. Our seesaw used to guide us. Tough job. I think half the kids in this school had the last name of Bazinet. Good Catholic family trying to outnumber the Protestants. Lots of brothers and sisters and cousins. I think half the people in this town ended up marrying Bazinets. I think this was Mr. Reynolds' classroom. In 1972, Janie Bridges stood up in front of the class and gave a book report on Germaine Greer's new book, The Female Eunuch. When she was finished, all the boys stood up, clapping wildly and shouting, "Bravo, bravo." But not really. As she reminded me at the reunion a few weeks ago, you guys all laughed at me. Well, we all liked Janie Bridges. But it was 1972, we were 16-year-old boys, and we had no idea the changes coming our way. Well, until Janie's book report. We were too busy smoking the new herb that had recently arrived in Northern Ontario. Not me, of course. But the bad element. I won't name them because the grandchildren might be watching, but they know who they are. He who enter shall perish. I don't think so. We had a problem with girl gangs in this school in the 1970s. One of the worst gangs was 5 girls who wore denim jean jackets and called themselves the T5, Terrible Five. They were vicious, man. They were just terrible. They were 1 grade below me, but I was afraid of them. I'm going to name them. I'm sure they're still in prison. They can't hurt me now. Diane Othmer, Heather Othmer, Charlotte Smith, Barbara Bazinet, and Karen Culhane. Hope I got that right. I wouldn't want to besmirch the innocent. And I think they had a +2, some backup there from Laurie Urban and Kathy LaFoy. Virtual girls' army. Cobalt's high school closed in 1976, along with its train station. The following year, a great fire destroyed 1/3 of the town, burning down 140 buildings. These heartbreaking events further dimmed the shooting star that Douglas Baldwin has called Canada's forgotten silver boomtown. Those of us who went to this small, intimate high school, surrounded by the immense, sprawling remains of one of the great events in Canadian history, we were lucky, and we knew it. Courage, honor, service.